Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at Doom: The Dark Ages on the RTX 5060. You can see the specs for our 5060 over here in GPU-Z. We're using the MSI Shadow 2X version of the card, which is just a simple 2-fan version. MSI Afterburner, you can see we're running on the latest NVIDIA drivers, no overclock applied. Pairing with a 9800X3D, which is certainly overkill for this particular GPU, but just to ensure that we don't have any sort of GPU bottleneck, CPU bottleneck, having the GPU ideally be the weakest part of our system will allow us to effectively benchmark it. And again, pairing with 64 gigabytes of DDR5. Let's hop in. And to start off with, we're just going to be here at 1080p, playing at native TAA. So I am kind of cheating in a way. Most of my other testing on NVIDIA GPUs, I was using DLAA, but because I kind of want to give the card a little bit of break to begin with, I'm going to start with TAA here and on the high preset. And while we are still within our video memory, according to our little helpful guide here, we are turning orange on that color, which just indicates that we're close to hitting our VRAM target. So our texture pool size right now is set to 2 gigabytes. We may have to adjust that down to 1.5, but for now we'll leave right here. And at native TAA here, as you can see, we are getting pretty solid performance to begin with, which is certainly reassuring. You know, this game is definitely a lighter weight game, so when we're using something like a 5060 or 60 class card, I'm really looking for ideally 60 FPS at 1080p, high to ultra settings, somewhere in there. Anything beyond 60, in my opinion, is really just a bonus for well-optimized games. But, you know, that's really just my personal kind of general metrics I go on. But I definitely, you know, especially on a game like this, I like to have more than 60 FPS, but here at right around 80 certainly feels real nice. Now TAA for our anti-aliasing, I will say, doesn't look super great. I think you could probably get away with TAA at higher resolutions, even 1440p. I think it would be, you know, much less like noticeable just how soft the image is. But you know, TAA really uses just like this kind of like almost like a blurry softening filter to kind of deal with those rough edges. But in a game like Doom, there really aren't very many rough edges to begin with. It's a pretty good looking game, and even without super advanced, you know, anti-aliasing, it looks okay. Or even with no anti-aliasing, if we had that option, which I actually don't believe we do. And yeah, I don't see any way to actually turn off our anti-aliasing at all, unfortunately. But as you can see, with TAA, we are getting a pretty solid experience. This is the most intensive part of our little run here, so getting above 60 FPS is, you know, pretty good here. Not, you know, amazing by any stretch. You know, it's certainly a pretty lightweight game, so while I'm happy to see we're above 60, it's, you know, I'd definitely like to be getting more, but it is outperforming the 4060, that's for sure. And let's go ahead and throw on DLAA just to get a little bit sharper of an image here, and obviously turn off our frame generation. And now with DLAA, interestingly enough, this does now exceed our video memory, so we'll see how that works. And I have that little overlay on. Unfortunately in Doom it looks pretty terrible, but as you can see, well, actually, let's get into a bit of combat. Here, definitely, you know, we're above 60, but let's make sure that we are still above 60 here with a bit of combat. And it looks like, yes, even with, you know, some combat here, we still are above that 60 FPS mark. So it's definitely nice to see. You know, I do think on 1080p, unless you're playing on like a relatively small screen, like maybe a, you know, 20-inch, 22-inch 1080p display, you don't really need super nice anti-aliasing. But if you're on anything larger than that, you know, if you're on a larger, higher resolution display and you kind of just want to go for 1080p, I do think those better anti-aliasing solutions are typically worth the performance hit. And even though we were getting that, you know, warning as far as our video memory goes, doesn't actually seem like it is hurting our performance. The game is generally very smooth, so we would definitely notice, you know, our frame time graph is incredibly flat right now, so we certainly would notice if that were changing. But yeah, getting right around 80 FPS on our average feels really great here. So let's go ahead and enable some upscaling here. So let's just go down to quality, which does give our video memory a bit of a break. And quality will look very good because it does have preset K built in, or one of the better models that uses that transformer model. So as you can see, we do get a pretty substantial performance increase, and probably at 1080p better looking image when compared to TAA, you know, and we're getting that performance increase. So it's kind of best of both worlds. You know, there's not really, in games that handle upscaling well, and Doom the Dark Ages certainly is a game that looks really great with upscaling. There's not really a super compelling reason to not use upscaling at all. Definitely, it seems like it gives you just, without many compromises at all, gives you a much, much better experience. So here with a bit of upscaling, we're still getting good picture, and now we're like well into the 100s on our FPS. So definitely would recommend doing that. Now, because we are, using a 50 series card, and because we already have a really high base FPS, let's go ahead and just go crazy here. Throw in our 4x frame generation. I will note that throwing on the frame generation does affect our video memory usage, so it does, again, give us that warning. So we'll see if this still feels like a smooth experience. Of course, we are now getting a super, super high FPS. In fact, much, much higher than you would really ever need in most cases, but you can get still, very, very smooth, fluid looking image here. And really, because we were coming from such a high FPS, any input latency that it does add, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty minimal as is. So yeah, definitely a very, very solid experience here across the board at 1080p high settings. And next up here at 1080p, we're going to go actually straight to DLAA because, to be honest, TAA looked pretty terrible. So native resolution here, no, sort of frame generation, and now at the max setting or ultra nightmare, which, while this is the max setting, of course, we don't have that path tracing update. So this particular setting will definitely look different in a few weeks. So here at ultra nightmare DLAA, we're still getting a good experience here, well above that 60 FPS to begin with. But, as I've kind of gone through these different benchmarks on different GPUs, it is certainly evident that really difference between high and ultra nightmare is pretty much like not really super significant at the current moment. I definitely think it will become more significant. And now they have said that path tracing update is supposed to come in June. So I'll be definitely revisiting some of these older cards. But as you can see, as we enter into our big major room here, there's really no need, in my opinion, to go down to TAA. Even with DLAA, you're still getting a really solid performance. With our 1% lows, even above 60 FPS. So it feels like really smooth and fluid. And the image does look considerably better here, with DLAA. Especially that, because we are using the transformer model, that model does apply also to just the anti-aliasing when we're just using DLAA. So super, super great looking image here. But we can definitely trade some of that image for, a bit of performance. So actually, let's go down to balance here. We'll leave frame generation off for now. And at balanced here, the great thing about the transformer model in a game like this is really just that you can use these more aggressive upscaling. So transformer model, and at balance still looks really, really great. And now we're getting a much, much more buttery smooth type experience here, right around 100 FPS. While it doesn't seem like a huge difference, in my opinion, a game like Doom, you really do want to have like really fluid, like smooth looking action, and you are able to get this at 1080p, no problem whatsoever. So with that balance preset, we're coming from 626p, which is a pretty low base resolution, but honestly still looks really great, and getting right around 110 FPS on our average here. So, and this is after the more intensive part, so I'm sure as soon as we start going into like slightly less intensive areas, like out here, you can see that is starting to climb like up into the 130s or high 120s. So definitely a real solid experience here, pretty much across the board at 1080p. So let's go ahead and play with our frame generation again. So we'll turn this on 4x. Let's dump this back to quality just because we're going to be kind of getting those frames from the frame generation. There's no need to really bump down that much. But here we are, max settings, quality DLSS with 4x frame gen. And here, of course, we are getting really, really solid FPS. And because we are coming from an already very high FPS, it feels like incredibly smooth, which I don't know what is going on with me lately. Seems like I'm actually almost dying in this game, which haven't died in one of these runs yet. I kind of would like to keep it that way. But as you can see, we're right around 200 plus FPS, 250, 240 range. Definitely feels really great. And if you had a super high resolution or I should say super high refresh rate 1080p display, you can certainly populate it really nicely. And this is without really sacrificing much of anything. It still feels incredibly fluid, responsive, and of course the visuals still look really sharp. Like even if we stand still, really inspect some things, everything looks really fluid, really sharp. Totally great experience here. All right, now bumping up to 1440p, and we're going to give TAA another shot here just to give our graphics card the best possible case of actually performing well. But just keep in mind, when we compare TAA to DLAA, the basics are that TAA is less intensive. So TAA will always perform better. However, DLAA, and especially DLAA when you have a good preset, a good DLL model inside of the game, like, the transformer model that we have here, will look considerably better. But it's less, important as you kind of bump up in resolution. So that's why we're trying it again here at 1440p. And we're going to go for the high preset here, and we did slide our texture pool size back down. So it's at, I believe this is exactly 1.5 gigabytes, and even with that adjustment, we are still in the red as far as our VRAM warning goes. So we'll see how this looks. And as we go ahead and get started, you can see we are holding above 60 FPS here for now. However, as we get into, start running around, you can see as soon as you kind of see that start dipping down below 50, even just running around this area, right away that when we enter that big room, we are going to be getting below 60 FPS. So unfortunately, it doesn't look like high settings are really on the table as far as native 1440p goes, but we'll play a little bit here and just see how it looks and how it performs. And yeah, even dipping into the 40s here. So while it doesn't feel terrible, 40 FPS is definitely not where you want to be at, in my opinion, playing a Doom game. So there's not really any major benefit here. And of course, we are using TAA even, which as far as the image quality goes, I think it looks okay. But unfortunately, it doesn't really matter because we're not going to be playing at native resolution anyways. And of course, if we were to be using upscaling, we would, definitely not go for the dynamic resolution that TAA offers. We'd be going for DLSS. So unfortunately, here at native, even using TAA, getting well below that 60 FPS. So we are going to have to immediately go in here and apply some upscaling. So let's just start light here and just go for DLSS quality, which does now get rid of that red warning there. And now at DLSS quality, we are getting above 60 FPS. So it seems like, high settings is certainly on the table so long as you are okay just utilizing a little bit of the upscaling. And honestly, there's not really a great reason not to. The image quality, the picture looks better, in my opinion, than TAA native anyways. And you can see at times, of course, this was like that area there is our more intensive area. So as we kind of get out here into a less intensive area, it's kind of funny. You'd think maybe all this stuff going on is more intensive, but it's actually way, way less intensive than a bunch of enemies. You can see now we're in like the 90 FPS territory here. So you are getting a much, much better experience. Don't be afraid, utilizing that upscaling. It's not a bad thing. And certainly on a 5060, upscaling is definitely going to be something that you are going to become more and more accustomed to using. So definitely don't want to, think of using upscaling is necessarily a loss so long as you are still getting a good picture, which we certainly are here, and still getting a good experience, which we also certainly are here at high settings. And we are getting such a good experience that I would be okay coming in here and introducing frame generation. So we're not getting like super, super high FPS, so I'm not going to go for 4X. We're just going to go for the default like 2X that's available on 40 series cards. And strangely enough, I've actually never seen this before. It seems like it's actually refusing to turn on the frame generation. You can see we are in the red as far as our video memory goes, but when we turn on even 2X here, now you can see there's no overlay. It's like it's completely refusing to turn it on, which is super bizarre. I've actually never seen this behavior before. So let's see if bumping down our DLSS here a bit until we're in better territories. Now we're in the orange, and let's apply this. And it does seem that now that we are below that threshold there, it does let us use the frame generation. So now we're at ultra performance frame generation. And while we are getting, 160 FPS here, definitely feels good. The frame generation is not really worth having to bump down all the way to performance here, or ultra performance rather. So that is actually incredibly interesting behavior. I have not actually seen that in any game where it's just refusing to allow you to input a setting. So if we go to 4X, now we're in the red. So it does let us apply more, but it doesn't seem to let us apply it without bumping down more. So let's kind of work backwards here and see if it lets us do it if we now leave it on and go back to quality. And yeah, it goes ahead and just turns off that frame generation for us. So that is incredibly strange behavior. But regardless, I probably wouldn't go for frame generation anyways. I'd rather just go for quality and turn it off. Actually already is off against our wishes here. And then, you'd kind of just be right around 70 or so FPS here at quality upscaling on high settings, which definitely feels very, very solid. So yeah, super interesting behavior there. But yeah, high settings, 1440p, not really an option if you want to play at native, but if you're okay using a bit of that upscaling, you can definitely get a really solid experience. And let's go ahead and leave DLSS on quality here and bump up to the Ultra Nightmare setting, which again, it's not really going to change a ton about our actual like graphic quality, while those settings seem to be kind of like reserved for when that path tracing gets introduced. So I'm not really expecting a world of difference in our performance. And yeah, we're still getting very, very high FPS. So obviously starting off here in the beginning of the map always gives us seemingly the highest FPS, but I'm not expecting to drop below 60 here, much like we weren't dropping below 60 with our high settings. So, you know, it's really up to you if you want to, you know, utilize the Ultra Nightmare setting. There may be some benefits here and there. You know, we do get like some nice ray tracing that certainly is enabled, although not quite as dramatic as I imagine it will be when that path tracing update comes out. But can play Ultra Nightmare with just DLSS quality using 960p as our upscaled resolution. Still looks really, really great. Obviously very responsive, and you know, I'm very happy with how this game performs with upscaling. It seems like regardless of really the upscaler that you use, I've tested, you know, all three of the major players from XeSS, FSR, and then obviously DLSS, and they all look really, really great, even despite the fact that we are not really on a, like it doesn't have FSR4 support, still looks really great. So whatever, you know, the developers at id Software did with this game, as far as the upscaling goes, it looks absolutely phenomenal. So I'm really very, very happy about that. And so you can see even our 1% low at 62, not really dipping below 60 at all from what I can see at high settings here. Or at the highest settings, I should say, Ultra Nightmare settings, so long as you are okay with just utilizing, you know, quality upscaling, which definitely looks pretty good in my opinion. And if you've made it this far into the video, I do just want to take a moment to say thank you to everyone who's been watching the videos. You know, they've been a ton of fun to make. I always have loved, you know, even before I started actually recording and uploading these videos, I've always loved kind of going through different GPUs just to see how they perform like myself. So I've always kind of benchmarked GPUs, and it's been a ton of fun to put these videos out and seeing all the response from you guys. So I really do truly appreciate all of the support that you guys have been showing. And yeah, I'm not planning on really stopping anytime soon. There's definitely a lot of games on the horizon to check out, and you know, even Doom with that path tracing update, it will definitely be interesting to check out. But yeah, if you've made it this far, and you know, I imagine those of you who have maybe are subscribers, or people who maybe just kind of stumbled across this video on your own, just want to, you know, take the opportunity to say thank you. I really do have a lot of fun making these videos, and I really appreciate everyone for checking them out. And our final resolution here is going to be 4K, and we're going to try just something really light here. We do want to test out here TAA native, which at 4K, TAA should be totally plenty as far as our anti-aliasing solution. May look a little blurry, so you may want to turn that off, but it will be more demanding, and I think we're going to need every ounce of performance we can get. We're going to start off here on medium settings, and again, so there's just native, medium settings, see how this looks. And as you can see here at, you know, medium settings, native resolution, the game looks good. I mean, obviously 4K looks sharp, especially at, you know, native resolution here. TAA, my opinion, looks totally fine. However, of course, the performance before we even enter into our more intensive zone is not really an acceptable level of performance. In fact, this game actually doesn't really work below 30 FPS. Like, it feels like you're playing in slow motion. So you need probably right around 30 FPS to even be able to play the game effectively. So even in the 20s, you know, like, people are moving in slow motion. Obviously, these guys are not supposed to be running this slow, like in slow motion. So immediately we are going to have to come in. And luckily, you know, the good thing, one of the only good things about these 50 series cards in this generation is just that when you have these lower end cards, you have so many different features at your disposal to kind of, you know, play with and see what we can make happen. And of course, the main one we're going to use here is that upscaling. So we're going to immediately come down to balanced upscaling, leaving everything else as is. And you can see balanced upscaling does give us, you know, a like somewhat playable experience. The game is actually running at full speed. It's not in slow motion anymore. You can see this is how those guys are actually supposed to be running, not like in slow motion like before. But we're still well below 60 FPS, which is not really where you want to be at, in my personal opinion. You know, you can definitely get, you know, really good looking image here. but you're at a pretty low FPS, and unfortunately, even frame generation, which we can go ahead and throw on here. So let's just see. Let's see. It probably won't even let us enable frame generation, but let's see. 3x frame gen. And yeah, the game doesn't even actually allow us to throw on frame generation, so it's actually not going to be an option. So really, if we want higher FPS, we can try dumping our settings down, but really you're going to want to use more, aggressive upscaling. So we're going to go all the way down to ultra performance. Now, luckily we do have that, transformer model, so the game does still look good. It doesn't look native 4K by no means. I mean, I can certainly tell a difference myself, and but you are, because of that upscaling, able to get, a 4K 60 picture here, which, I don't know if I should say it's impressive, but with this particular DLSS model or DLL model, it actually looks pretty good. I mean, it doesn't look native, but it looks good enough that, hey, if you have a 4K display, and maybe you just play like really light games typically, like you just play roguelites or, Counter-Strike or super competitive type games, and you like the 4K for the sharpness, and you just want to kind of check this game out and you have a lower end GPU, you can certainly use these tricks and still get a playable experience without actually having to bump down the resolution that you're playing at down. This definitely looks and feels much better than just playing at, if you were to just change your monitor's resolution to 1440p and play there. So definitely not a bad thing. I've played at much worse looking upscaling, so definitely looks pretty solid. And now we are getting, in the territory where we could start introducing a bit of frame generation. However, we'll see if the game actually lets us. So right around 90 or so FPS on our average here. And let's see if the game will let us implement frame generation. You can see 2x already puts us into that red mark there, so I actually don't think it's going to let us. And yeah, it doesn't let us implement that frame generation, unfortunately, which is kind of a bummer because, actually doesn't even tell you that it's not on. Like if you're just coming to the settings, it looks like it's on. Of course, if you count your FPS or if you have that overlay, you would know it's not on, but wish it was a bit more transparent about that. But it does look like, at least at medium settings, this is the most we're going to get. No really frame generation is going to save us. But while we're here, let's go ahead. We'll bump down to low settings and see if this gives us any more wiggle room. And at low settings, we do get a pretty substantial performance increase, now like in the 90s. And honestly, the game doesn't look much worse at low settings. So you certainly could play here at low settings. And now we are in the territory where it does look like it is going to let us enable that frame generation. As you can see, our video memory is showing as white here. So now that our VRAM is telling us like, okay, it's okay, you have enough, we definitely can come in here and throw on some frame generation. Now 4x is giving us a warning. That's not going to work. 3x, same thing. 2x, oh man, it's still giving us a warning. So actually I thought that would work, but it doesn't seem like it actually wants us to turn on that frame generation. So that is funny how it doesn't let us do that. But yeah, I guess frame generation 4K would be nice if it could help you, but even at low settings, unfortunately, doesn't look like you are going to be getting any sort of help. Let's see if we turn present from compute. Does that help at all? Frame generation 2x? No. All right. Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't look like frame generation wants to work here at 4K. It seems like that's going to be a setting reserved for other GPUs or, GPUs that have more than 8 gigabytes of video memory. So, which of course is the major pitfall of this card. But yeah, in general, I'm happy with the performance. You can play at 4K, get 100 FPS. Of course, we're not actually at 4K, but you're getting a convincing enough looking image that, in my opinion, I'd say it's a pass. And for a $300 GPU, I'm relatively happy with the performance, especially if you're upgrading from a 4060, 3060, something like that. You're going to be having a good experience. 3060, 12 gigabytes, it sounds like a better card because it has 12 gigabytes. It's not a better card. 1080 Ti is not a more powerful card. Benchmarked all these cards in this game, and they don't perform nearly as well. So while the 8 gigabytes is pretty inexcusable and does lead to a lot of problems, it's not the only thing to consider when you're looking for a GPU. So if you already have 5060, you're going to be having good experience on a lot of games. This is one of them, as long as you're not expecting the world from the card. But I will say it definitely is a bit irritating when you run into that particular limitation. And I do think that the 50 series of cards should be the last generation that NVIDIA offers 8 gigabytes. You know, even just bumping up to like 10 gigabytes would be an improvement. 12 gigabytes would be great. That's probably where I would think the entry level should come in. 12 gigabytes. Just get rid, if you can't do it at $300, just get rid of the $300 price point. Or if you can cut costs elsewhere, then great. Otherwise, I just don't think 8 gigabytes is really going to lead to a good experience for most people. And, you know, we can get away with it on a variety of different settings in this game, but in general, it's not a great experience. All right, guys, I appreciate it so much. Thank you for watching. The 5060 is certainly an interesting card, a capable card, good upgrade over the 4060, but still has a lot of problems that, you know, were present there with the 4060. But, you know, you can certainly play Doom the Dark Ages, well-optimized game, and have a good experience at pretty much any resolution, 1080p, all the way up to 4K. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.